The part I'm most proud of isn't the job itself. It's what I told my daughter that night when she asked me why I didn't keep it. I've been doing electrical work for going on 18 years. Started as an apprentice straight out of high school, got my journeyman's license at 23, ran my own one-man operation by 28. Aldridge Electric, LLC. Which sounds more impressive than it was. It was me, a used van, and a set of tools I'd been collecting since before I could legally drink. After my wife left, it became me, my tools, my van, and my 9-year-old daughter Maeve, who drew horses on everything she could find and called my work truck Big Ugly, with a level of affection I never quite understood. We weren't struggling. I want to be clear about that. We weren't driving past the grocery store because the account was empty. But there's a version of not struggling that still means you check the account before you say yes to something, and that was us. Private school fundraisers and field trip fees, and the slow creep of everything costing more than it used to. We were fine, but fine has edges, and I knew where all of mine were. The call came on a Tuesday in October. I remember because I was in the middle of rewiring a detached garage in Naperville, and my phone kept buzzing in my chest pocket and I kept ignoring it until the third time, when something told me to stop what I was doing and pick up. The voice on the other end was calm and professional, in the way that people who work for very wealthy other people tend to be calm and professional. She introduced herself as Claudine, said she was calling on behalf of a client who had an urgent electrical situation at a residence in Winnetka, and asked if I had availability that afternoon. I told her I might, depending on the situation. She told me the situation, a 7,000 square foot home on the North Shore. Full power loss to the east wing, no lights, no HVAC, no outlets. 2 other electrical contractors had already come out. One had quoted $42,000 and said it was likely a cascading panel failure that would require a full rewire of that section of the house. The other had agreed with the diagnosis, come in slightly lower at $38,000. And said the timeline would be 68 weeks. The client was not interested in 68 weeks. The client had a family visiting for Thanksgiving, and the east wing contained 4 of the 7 bedrooms. I told Claudine I could be there by 2. I knew the neighborhood. Had done work out there before, a few times over the years. Mostly additions and upgrades for people who'd bought older homes and discovered that the electrical systems inside them belonged to a different era. Winnetka is old money in a way that Naperville isn't, and old money tends to live in old houses, and old houses tend to have old wiring, and old wiring tends to surprise people who assume that expensive means updated. The house was what I expected and more. Long private driveway, mature oaks on both sides just starting to turn, a stone facade that probably cost more per square foot than my entire mortgage. There was a slate gray Range Rover parked near the front, and beside it a matte black Mercedes that looked like it had been detailed that morning. Claudine met me at the door, 50s, efficient, the kind of woman who had managed complicated situations long enough that nothing visibly registered on her face anymore. She walked me through the entry, 15-foot ceilings, a chandelier the size of my kitchen, and gave me the rundown as we moved toward the east wing. The power had gone out 8 days ago. The homeowner had been patient, Claudine said, but patient had a limit, and that limit was approximately Thanksgiving. I asked who the homeowner was. Claudine said her name was Petra Vance. I didn't recognize the name. I found out later that most people did. Petra Vance had built a supply chain logistics company from a single warehouse in Gary, Indiana, into a national operation with over 4,000 employees and revenues somewhere in the range of $800 million a year. She'd been on the cover of Forbes twice. She had a foundation. She had opinions about infrastructure that occasionally appeared in the Wall Street Journal. She was, by any reasonable measure, a person who existed in a world I had never set foot in. She was also standing in the hallway when Claudine and I came around the corner, wearing a navy cashmere sweater and reading something on her phone, and she looked up at me with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting longer than she intended and is choosing, consciously, not to say so. "You're the electrician," she said. "I am," I said. "Joel Marsden, Petra." She didn't offer her hand. Not rude, exactly. More like she was in a mode where pleasantries weren't the priority. The other 2 contractors both said the same thing. Panel failure, full rewire, 5 or 6 figures in 2 months. I'm hoping you're going to tell me something different. I don't know what I'm going to tell you yet, I said. I haven't looked at anything. She studied me for a second. Then she nodded and said, "Fair enough," and gestured for me to proceed. I started where I always start, which is not with assumptions. The two contractors before me had both reached the same conclusion, and that conclusion was expensive and time-consuming, and in my experience, when two contractors in a row reach the same expensive conclusion without fixing anything, the expensive conclusion is sometimes wrong. I asked Claudine to walk me through exactly what happened the day the power went out. Not what the other contractors had said. What actually happened, in the sequence it happened. She said there had been a storm. Not severe, no downed lines, no flooding. But there had been a surge sometime that evening, and the following morning the east wing had no power. Everything else in the house was fine. I asked if anything had been running in the east wing at the time of the surge. Anything unusual. Claudine thought about it. She said there had been a crew earlier that week doing some renovation work in one of the east wing bedrooms. New flooring. They'd been using a table saw and a shop vac. I said thank you and went to look at the panel. The main panel was in the basement. A newer square D, well-maintained, properly labeled, the kind of setup you'd expect in a house that had been thoughtfully updated at some point in the last 20 years. The east wing ran off a sub-panel, also square D, also reasonably recent. When I opened it, everything looked fine. No visible damage, no burn marks, no trip breakers that hadn't already been reset, which told me the problem wasn't in the panel. I spent the next 40 minutes walking the east wing with my multimeter and a non-contact voltage tester, checking every outlet, every junction box, every light fixture I could access. And then I found it. In the bedroom where the renovation crew had been working, behind the new baseboard that they'd reinstalled after the flooring went in, there was a junction box. And inside that junction box was a wire nut connection that had been disturbed, probably when the crew moved the baseboard, probably without them even realizing it. The connection wasn't fully broken. It was loose. Loose enough that under normal conditions it maintained contact, but during the surge, with the extra load from the tools the crew had been running, it had arsed, and the arc had tripped a GFCI outlet in the hallway bathroom, one single GFCI outlet, which happened to be the first outlet in a daisy chain that fed almost the entire east wing. The GFCI had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It had tripped to protect the circuit, and then, because no one had thought to look for it, because the two contractors who came before me had both gone straight to the panel and started talking about rewires, it had just sat there in the tripped position for 8 days while everyone argued about a problem that didn't exist. I reset the GFCI. I tightened the wire nut connection in the junction box and wrapped it properly. I spent another 20 minutes checking everything downstream to make sure there was no actual damage from the arc. Then I went to find Petra Vance. She was in what I think was a sitting room, working at a desk near the window, and she looked up when I knocked on the open door. "That was fast," she said, and her tone made it clear that fast, in this context, was not necessarily a compliment. The other contractors weren't wrong that there was a problem, I said. They were wrong about what the problem was. I explained what I'd found: the junction box, the loose connection, the GFCI, the renovation crew. I watched her face as I talked. She was smart. I could tell she was following it, processing it, cross-referencing it against everything she'd already been told. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So it's fixed," she said. "It's fixed? Both bedrooms?" "All 4. And the bathrooms, and the hallway, and the sitting area at the end of the wing. You've got full power to the entire east wing." She looked at me for a long moment. "What did you replace?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "I didn't need to replace anything. I reset a tripped safety outlet and secured a wire connection that had been loosened by the renovation crew. The part I used cost about $1.20, which was the wire nut, and I had that in my truck." The silence in the room was the particular kind of silence that happens when someone has been prepared for something enormous and then the enormous thing turns out to be nothing. She leaned back in her chair. She looked at the desk. She looked at me. $40,000, she said. It wasn't a question. "That was their estimate," I said. "Not mine." She was quiet again. Then she said, "You know, I almost just said yes to the first one, the 42. I had my assistant ready to sign the contract. She talked me out of it, said we should get one more opinion first. I told her I was glad she did. She asked me what I charged for the service call. I told her my rate was $95 an hour, and I'd been there just under 2 hours, so call it $190, and she could add $20 for the wire nut if she wanted to be precise. She looked at me like I'd said something in a language she didn't speak. Then she stood up and walked to the doorway, and she looked out at the East Wing hallway, where the lights were on again for the first time in 8 days. And she said, "Mr. Marsden, I would like to offer you a significant bonus." I said I appreciated that and asked what she had in mind. What she had in mind was her second car. She walked me to the garage. A 4-car garage that I had not previously been aware was attached to the house, and she showed me a white Porsche Cayenne Turbo that sat on the far end next to a covered shape that I assumed was something even more significant. She said the Cayenne was 3 years old, low miles, recently serviced, and worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000, and that she wanted to give it to me. I told her that was very generous and I couldn't accept it. She gave me a look that said people didn't often tell her no. "I'm not a charity case," I said. "And you're not obligated. You didn't underpay me. I charged what I charge." "I'm not doing it out of obligation," she said. "I'm doing it because the alternative was $40,000 and 6 weeks of construction noise, and my family sleeping in a hotel for Thanksgiving. You gave me back 8 days and a quarter of my house in 2 hours. The car is worth more than 2 hours of your time, and we both know it, but it's what I have that I can give you." I stood in that garage for a minute, and I thought about Maeve. I thought about her school and the roof on our house that I'd been nursing along for 2 years and the college fund that I'd been adding to slowly, steadily, with the particular discipline of a person who knows that slowly and steadily is the only way available to him. I thought about what $80,000 would mean. Then I thought about who I was and how I'd gotten here and what I'd told Maeve about the way we do things. "I'll tell you what," I said. "I'll accept a fair bonus, $500. That covers my time adequately and lets you feel like you've done something which I understand you want to do. But I won't take the car." Petra Vance studied me for a long moment, and then she said something I didn't expect. "You have a kid." It wasn't a question. I don't know what she saw. Maybe the fatigue. Maybe something about the way I'd talked earlier, some stray reference I'd made without realizing. Whatever it was, she'd read it. "I have a daughter," I said. "Maeve, she's 9. Just you. Just me. Going on 4 years. She nodded. She didn't say she was sorry the way people sometimes do, that reflexive sorry that never quite fits because it isn't really about you, it's about their own discomfort with the situation. She just nodded like it was information and she was placing it accurately. "My father raised me alone," she said, "after my mother left. He was an electrician, actually. I didn't say anything. He worked in Gary," she said, "for 32 years. He never made much. But he knew what he was doing, and he didn't pretend otherwise, and he didn't let anyone tell him his work was worth less than it was." She paused. "He would have told me the same thing you just found. He would have checked the GFCI first." I asked when he'd passed. She said, 3 years ago. In the same tone she'd said everything else, but there was something underneath it. We stood there in that garage for another moment. 2 people in very different circumstances recognizing something in each other that didn't have a clean name. Then she went back inside and came out with a check for $2,500, which she said was non-negotiable, and I said I'd accept under protest, and she almost smiled. She also gave me her card. Said if I was ever interested in taking on a contract for facilities maintenance on her commercial properties. She had a vendor who was retiring at the end of the year, and she was going to need someone reliable. She said reliable was, in her experience, not as common as it should be. I said I'd think about it. I drove home in Big Ugly with $2,500 in my jacket pocket and the radio on low. And I thought about all of it. The junction box, the GFCI, the $42,000 estimate that had almost been signed before someone said wait, and Petra Vance's father, who had been an electrician in Gary and had died 3 years ago, and would have checked the same thing I checked. Maeve was at my sister's after school on Tuesdays, so the house was quiet when I got home. I changed out of my work clothes and started dinner, and I thought about what I was going to tell her when she got back. She came in at 6:15, dropped her backpack by the door, the way I'd asked her not to approximately 400 times, and immediately began telling me about a horse she'd been drawing at lunch that had wings and also a sword, for some reason that she explained at length, and I followed about half of. We ate dinner. I waited until she'd finished and we were doing the dishes. She washed, I dried, which was the deal. And then I told her about the day. I told her about the call in the house and the east wing with no power and the two contractors who'd both said the same expensive thing. I told her about walking the rooms with the voltage tester, about the junction box behind the new baseboard, about the GFCI sitting there tripped in the bathroom for 8 days, while everyone argued about a problem that was, at its core, a loose connection and a safety switch that had done its job. She was quiet in the way she gets quiet when she's actually listening, which is different from the quiet she uses when she's being polite about not listening. "So you fixed it," she said. "I fixed it. With a wire nut, essentially." She thought about this, and the other guys wanted like $40,000. 42. She made a face. "For what?" "For the work they were planning to do to fix a problem that didn't exist," I said. They saw a complicated situation, and they assumed the answer had to be complicated. But sometimes the simple thing is actually the thing. She handed me a plate to dry. "What did she pay you?" I told her about the $2,500. I told her about the car offer and that I'd turned it down. She stopped washing and looked at me. "You turned down a Porsche?" "I turned down a Porsche." "Dad, that's worth like, a lot, yeah, why?" And here is the part I think about when I think about that day. Not the junction box, not the GFCI, not Petra Vance's father who had worked in Gary for 32 years. This part. Because I had to find the words for a 9-year-old who was looking at me with actual genuine confusion about why her father had turned down a car that was worth more than everything we owned combined. And I didn't want to give her the version that sounded like a fortune cookie. I wanted to give her the real reason. "Because I charged what I charge," I said. "I charged $95 an hour, and I was there for 2 hours. That's what the job was worth. I did the job well. I did it better than 2 people before me, but doing it well doesn't mean I get to take something that belongs to somebody else's life. She bought that car with money she earned. That's hers. I can't accept something that enormous for an afternoon's work just because she feels grateful. That would make me feel like I took advantage of her feelings instead of being paid for my skill." Maeve thought about this for a long time. Long enough that I dried 2 more plates and put them away. "But she wanted to give it to you," she said. "She did," I said. "And it was generous. But there's a difference between what someone offers and what's actually right to take. She was offering because she was relieved and grateful and a little bit in shock. The car is worth $80,000. I was there for 2 hours. Even if every hour of my life were worth more than it currently is, that math doesn't work." "But what about the money you saved her?" Maeve asked. "You saved her, like $40,000. "Yeah," I said, "and she paid me for that. The $2,500 was for that. That was fair." She handed me the last pan. She was quiet again. Then she said, "I think I get it. You didn't want to be paid for something you didn't do. Like, you didn't save her $40,000. She almost spent $40,000. That's different." I put the pan on the rack and I looked at my daughter, who was 9 years old, and had just explained my own reasoning back to me more clearly than I'd explained it to myself. "Yeah," I said. "That's exactly it." She seemed satisfied. She dried her hands on the dish towel, and then she went and got her backpack and fished out a piece of paper, which she put on the kitchen table in front of me. It was the horse with wings and a sword. In the corner, in her handwriting that was just starting to develop the particular slant it would probably carry for the rest of her life, she'd written, "Me and Dad fix things." I don't know if she planned that, or if it was just what she'd written and she'd remembered it and thought it was relevant. I didn't ask, I just kept it. 6 weeks later, I got a call from Petra Vance's assistant about the facilities contract. 3 of her commercial buildings in the Chicago metro, routine maintenance and emergency response. A retainer that would come in just under $3,000 a month before any actual work. I said yes. It was enough to let me hire 1 part-time helper and stop checking the account before I agreed to things. The first time I went to her offices to sign the paperwork,